Greetings from rural Northumberland, folks. You've heard of a Gorse beer? Well, today I'm going to make a Gorse beer. And here it is. Beautiful gorse flowers which I'm going to pick for the brew. So they're the yellow petals of the gorse. And I'm going to fill this up. So there we go, folks, a nice full bowl of gorse flowers. Right, let's go back to Leeds and in the kitchen and crack on with the brew. Good morning from the kitchen, folks. Today I'm going to be getting on with my gorse beer. So you've already seen me pick the gorse. Here's the other ingredients. So I'm going to be using a kilogram of Crisp CaraGold Malt, 500 grams of Crisp Chocolate Malt. I'm going to be using spring water because the tap water in Leeds is chlorine. Initially I'm going to start off with 5 litres, but that will increase. For my yeast I'm going to use Crossmyloof Kolsch Yeast. I'm going to put hops in there, courtesy of Crossmyloof also, Amarillo hops, and then I've got some Browin Yeast Nutrient. Besides these there'll be a bit of brewing sugar, probably a couple of 100 grams, just to slightly raise the ABV when it goes into the fermentation vessel. And today's fermentation vessel is simply a Tesco 5 litre water bottle. So I'm going to begin by adding my malt into my big pan. So here goes the CaraGold, and that's followed by the 500 grams of chocolate malt. And then I'm going to fill my pan right up with water, spring water, and I'm going to add an initial 5 litres. Right, water in. So I'm just giving it a stir with my big spoon. I want it all to be mixed and I don't want anything at all sticking to the bottom. So then it's gas on and heat on. Oof. Right, I'm going to turn that heat right down to the lowest it can be. So what's going to happen now is that this is very slowly going to come to heat over a matter of 4 or 5 hours. It won't reach a boil. On the off chance that it does, the spoon will prevent boil over. Great lesson to learn that. There's no lid on there because this releases sulfides, and if you do put a lid on, it traps the sulfides in the beer, and that gives your beer a cabbagey smell which you don't want. So there's literally nothing for me to do now for the next 4 or 5 hours other than be patient and occasionally stir. So I'll see you in a bit. This has been on now for 4 hours. I've been stirring it constantly and I've just topped it up a little bit with some more spring water as it was just dropping beneath the initial level. So I've just made it a little bit looser again. Anyway, I'm going to turn the heat off now. And I've got 30 grams of gorse flowers in here. And I'm going to add them in. Just going to spread them across and stir them in. And I'm going to leave that now to pretty much completely cool down, so it's going to be on there for another 4 or 5 hours. So once again, I'll be back in a bit. Okay, I've got my grain in the sink. There it is in the wort. I'm going to put my grain into this muslin bag and I'm going to squeeze it into this pot. Right, it's a dirty, horrible job. But this hasn't been boiled yet, so I'm not too worried about hygiene. My hands are clean, obviously, but I'm not worried about sanitisation in terms of everything being sanitised. People get a bit anal about stuff like that in brewing. What do you think the monks did in the olden days? So I am going to literally put my grain into this bag, which is an awful job in itself because it's mucky. There you go, looks awful. I want that in here. Right, and it is simply a case of squeeze and squeeze and squeeze, squeeze, and it's horrible. So, after the first squeeze, I've got grain in there, I've got liquid in there, and I've got a long way to go. I'll catch you in a bit. Okay, there's the grain. I've not done with that yet. And here is some very thick liquid. This now needs to go back into that pot. Ignore the apples, they're for some cider. The liquid is like chocolate. It literally is like melted chocolate. So that's where I am with that. And as for this lot, some of that is now going back in there. Some of it might be going in there, and some of it might be staying in there. Let's see what happens. So I've got my wet grains, into the pan they go, and I want to pretty much fill the pan up. So I've got my wet grain in the saucepan, and I'm now going to top the saucepan up with spring water. This is my homage to the sparge. It's not truly sparging, but it's close enough. I want to give that a stir around, just like that. A long way to go yet. And once again, and with what's left in here, that'll do. Okay, so there's my wort, and here is my grain in cold water, where it's going to soak now for a couple of hours, and then I'm going to strain it off, get the water out, into the big pan, ready for the boil. So I'll be back in a couple of hours. See you then, folks. Right, let's get back on with it. So here's a reminder. This is what I've got here, and now it's going into this. Okay, I'm starting with my wok of grain and sparge water. And I want all that grain in the sieve, all of it. And then with the back of my spoon, I'm going to push and push and push the water out of the grain, through the sieve and the funnel into the demijohn. And then when I've done, sieve out, wok, splat. And I've got to carry on now, and this is going to take me probably about 10 minutes, so you don't need to see all this because it's boring. I'll be back soon. So here's the net result. That's the demijohn, that's the grain, and all the liquid is now in here, in the pan, and this feels really thick and syrupy. What I'm going to do now is bring this to the boil, and then I'm going to add the hops. So gas on and heat on. I'm going to put this on top, and I want this liquid now to come to a boil. So I'll be back when it's boiling. Okay, the beer wort is boiling. Time to add some hops. I'm going to add 40 grams of Amarillo hops. 40 grams might sound like a lot. However, these hops have been open for quite a while and they've dried out, so I'm just going to risk 40 grams. I think it'll be fine. Okay, I'm now going to leave this to simmer for 30 minutes. Right, this has been boiling now for 30 minutes. I think it's had enough, so I'm going to turn it off. There's no rapid cooling. It's going to stay in the pan overnight. So I'll catch you tomorrow morning and we'll pick it up from there. See you then, folks. Hey folks, it's the next day and the Gorse beer continues. Let's have a look. So here it is. It's been there overnight. It's now nice and cool, and I'm going to get it from there into this demijohn using a funnel and a filter. Now I'm going to stand it in this demijohn for a while, and I want to see where the sediment line is before determining whether I'm going to rack it before adding the yeast or whether I'm just going to let it go as it is. So from there to there with this. So the filter will capture any bits of grain that are still in there, any gorse leaves and the hot pellets. So what I'll get in the actual demijohn will be less sediment heavy than what it would have been otherwise. Everything that I'm using has been sanitised. It's a very, very thick liquid. I mean, look at that, that is treacle. I can see I'm just going to be doing one. Oh my word, there is some big lumps in that. I'm going to be doing one of these at a time and leaving it. It's going to take quite a while, this process. It's not an exciting thing to watch, as I'm sure you can appreciate. So I'll be back when it's over. Just a quick update. I was losing the will to live with the filter. It was taking so long, so I've moved to a sieve, and even that's taking a while. This is a very, very laborious task. Okay, after a couple of hours and a lot of effort and a lot of patience, I've got a full demijohn full, and I want to transfer this into what will be the fermentation vessel. It's so thick, it looks more like a kit extract. It's a very messy job. In fact, it's that thick, it can't even get through the funnel properly. It's like pouring liquid chocolate. Okay, there it is. Now, I was hoping to leave this for a little while and see where the sediment line begins to form. I don't know if one will begin to form, if I'm quite honest, but I'm going to wait a few hours and see, and then I'll come back to you. Okay, it's been a couple of hours and there is absolutely no visible sediment line whatsoever, and I suspect that's because this is so thick that it's just all hanging around in suspension. So I had a brainwave. I'm going to make this an imperial Gorse beer, and I'm going to split it across 2 fermenting vessels. So I'm going to add to it 524 grams of brew sugar, a tin of black treacle, and some spring water. So I've got my saucepan, I've got my brew sugar, that's going in there, and I'm going to top the saucepan up with spring water. At least I'm going to cover the brew sugar with spring water, and I'm going to give this a stir around. And then it's gas on and heat on. So I want the brew sugar to melt. It will melt fairly quickly. And while that's happening, I'm going to pour the black treacle in. Here goes. I think it will suit the beer quite well, to be honest. Okay, this is now done. And I've had another slight change of plan. Instead of using that demijohn, I'm going to use a second Tesco water bottle, just because it'll make measuring the amounts easier in terms of equity, because the sizes and the volumes of these vessels are different, whereas these two are identical. So I'm going to begin by attempting to pour half of this into the other water bottle. I want them to be the same, so I'm basically making more of the same beer and not 2 different beers. Okay, they're identical, so that's good. So now I'm going to add the melted sugar and black treacle water. So a bit in this one, and a bit in this one, and a bit in this one. Again, I've got those identical. Okay, Okay, now I'm going to add some spring water. I'm not going to add too much because this is going to form a very large krausen and I don't want it to all come spewing out of the top. And as soon as I've got 2 fermentation vessels, I might as well take advantage of the fact and not feel like I've got to completely stuff them. Perfect, so they're both exactly the same. Right, they're a bit warm for me to take the gravity at the minute, so I'm going to leave them to cool and I'll come back to you when they've cooled down a bit. Okay, I've got my beer wort to 20 degrees, so it's now time to take the original gravity. Hydrometer in. And I am starting with an original gravity of 1.056. 1056. I'm now going to add a sprinkling of yeast nutrient into each of the fermentation vessels. I'm sort of aiming for roughly the equivalent of a heaped teaspoon, or thereabouts. So now I've got my yeast nutrient in, I'm going to add my yeast. I'm going to add a Kolsch yeast into this one, and that is the equivalent of a good heaped teaspoonful again that's just gone in there, half of this packet basically. Now in this fermentation vessel I'm going to add crystal Weissen yeast. Now I was going to put Kolsch yeast in all of it, but since I've split it, let's see how 2 different yeasts work. So the crystal Weissen yeast is going to go in here, and again it's the equivalent of a heaped teaspoonful which I've put in. Crystal Weissen is generally more like a white beer, doesn't matter really, but it's usually something which is a bit cloudier. So now with each of my fermentation vessels, I just need to give them a slosh around, get the yeast and the nutrient to mix in. And it also aerates it a bit, which apparently has added benefits. Not really sure what they are. Just do it anyway. Now I've got my fermentation vessels back on here, I'm going to put the airlock in place with the water in here. Now I need to explain to you that I'm only putting these in now because these are going to be static on here. If I have to move these fermentation vessels, which invariably I will, then I'm going to take the airlocks off first because they're plastic fermentation vessels, and if I pick it up it's going to go and suck the water out of the airlock into the wort, and I don't want that to happen. So that's a top tip for you. If you are using plastic fermentation vessels, take your airlock out when you move it. So there they both are. Kolsch on that side, crystal Weissen on that side. I'll label them up. Right, I've got my demijohns labelled up. I'll be back in a little while when fermentation has begun, just so we can see how it's going. All right, see you then, folks. So just an update. It's 2 hours later. Both beers have got krausens. The one with the Kolsch yeast has got a slightly plumper krausen than with the crystal Weissen, but there's not a lot in it really, and they both seem to be fermenting steadily. So unless anything dramatic happens during the fermentation process, the next film that you'll see from me will be at the end of fermentation when it comes to either racking or bottling. But if something happens along the way that's worthy of note, I will be back. See you then, folks. Good afternoon from the kitchen, folks. It's my dark autumnal Gorse beer racking and clearing day. Let's have a look at it. So, I'm not going to get a lot of bang for my buck. That and that is trub and sediment. That is beer. It's hugely inefficient brewing from grain in a demijohn. I do it just as a bit of a laugh, to be quite honest. I know I'm not professional, and I don't even allude to be professional. But what I think I'm going to do, rather than just carry on with small amounts in 2 separate vessels, is cut my losses and stick them both back together into this demijohn before I add finings, which is clear beer and wine finings from Young's, 2-step process, bottle A and bottle B. But I will have a little taste of each to see if there is a taste difference as I'm doing this. So starting with the Kolsch one, it is airlock out, siphoning tube in. I've got my tube held in place with this clip. I can't tell where the bottom is, so it's potluck. but I'm going to siphon it through a filter anyway, so if I do pick up any trub, hopefully it won't do too much damage. So here goes. And it's quite thick. I think I might just be in the trub. It seems to be thinning out a little bit now. So this is the one with the Kolsch yeast. I'm just going to put a little bit in this glass. We'll have a little taster of that. I'm going to get bubbles in the siphoning tube any second now, I think. I think I've got this just about right. Yeah, I have. Excellent. So I'm literally just above the sediment line, so that's pretty much spot on. I'm going to leave it at that. I'm now going to add the equivalent of a teaspoonful of finings A generous teaspoonful. And then it's the Gorse beer with the Hefeweizen yeast. Again, same principle as before. And again, messy. That's a stout or a porter. It's not a stout, it's a porter. It's not what I set out to make. So maybe I need to call this my Autumn Gorse Porter. It's got a fairly nice ring to it. Gorse picked in spring, beer made in autumn. Fair. Pop a little bit in here. It's got a lovely sort of ruby quality to the colour that's coming through. Really very nice. And my demijohn's nearly full and I'm almost at the sediment line, so this is going to be just about spot on, I think. So my demijohn is now full, so I'm just going to go back into the glass. Waste not, want not. Yorkshireman and all that. There we go, bubbles in the siphoning tube. Tell me that's over. So this is what I'm left with in the demijohn. You can see it's very full and there's a bit of a reaction going on as the two beers have met. So cheers, this is the beer that came from the fermentation vessel that had the Kolsch yeast in it. It's dry, it's thick, it's coffee. I'm not immediately sure what the Gorse flavour is. It tastes like a dry porter, to be quite honest, but quite a thick one. Let's try the one with the Hefeweizen yeast. Now this one's thinner. In terms of flavour, almost identical. I don't know whether it's because I've got used to it a bit more, but palate-wise I prefer this one, and it could be down to the fact that it's slightly less thick. But they're so similar that they're basically indistinguishable in flavour terms. So I'm fine with mixing them, that's worked out okay. So I now need to leave this for an hour, and then I'll come back and add finings B, so I'll catch you then. Okay, an hour has passed, let's have a look. I've got it wrapped up to keep the sun off, but it doesn't take long to see that there is no visible sediment build-up there from me adding finings A, so I'm just simply going to tip it back now into this one with finings B. So just a straight pour. I've got the filter in still, just in case. Here goes, nice and steady. Again, there's going to be people going, no, it's getting oxygen to it. Ooh, I'm not bothered. I do it my way, and if it works, it works, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. Okay, finings B. I've got half of it in there pretty much, so finings B, teaspoonful equivalent-ish. Might have been a dessert spoon, not bothered. And let's get this done. So I'm just going to give it a little swishel around. Hopefully that findings will mix. I don't know if it's going to make any difference or not. I tend to find quite often with the dark ones that it doesn't. We'll see. Right, that'll do. Get this back on. Actually, I won't screw it tight until I've moved it, for the reason I've told you before, that it acts like a lung and sucks the water in. So I actually won't put it on yet. I'm going to move this into the utility room, and then that'll be done. Next film will probably be in between 5 and 7 days' time. I'll be having a look at what effect the findings has had and then bottling. Okay? See you then, folks. Good morning from the kitchen, folks. Today I'm going to be bottling my Autumn Gorse Porter. Let's have a look at it. So, it is still very, very black. There is no opacity. I can't see through it in the large bottle at all. I can't even tell where the sediment line begins and ends, or indeed if there is a sediment line. So I'm just going to have to take potluck with this one. So I'm bottling today into a mixture of 500ml bottles and a 660, and I've got a 330 tucking down there somewhere. In the 660, I will add this much sugar, which is almost a full one of these. And that represents what I would call a teaspoonful. In the 500s, I'll add half of one of these. Now, this is carbon sugar, or it's just sugar for carbonation, and the yeast which is in suspension in the beer will eat this sugar, and that will hopefully give this beer a bit of life, as in a slight sparkle, and hopefully a head when I pour it. So I just need to unscrew the bung. Siphoning tube in. I'm holding the tube in place with this clip. I've got no clue where the bottom is whatsoever. It's complete potluck. The first bit that comes out is going into the hydrometer jar, and then I'm moving into the bottles. So let's crack on. And out it comes, liquid licorice. And into the bottles. Well, it still smells like a beer. A very black beer. I'm bottling into beer bottles today, and there's a couple of cider bottles tucked in there. The big one I've just done is a Cobra bottle, and it's a beautiful design. Look at the intricate work on that. And I should see bubbles in the tube any second now. And there we go. And that means that siphoning is over. I think I judged that quite well. Guesswork, but it's worked. And I've just exactly perfectly guessed what I was going to get here. This one, the small one, isn't quite full, but I can add what's in the hydrometer tube, which I don't normally do, and it will fill that one up then. So let's check out the final gravity of this brew. And it's finished on 1.020, 1020. Okay, it's time to work out the final ABV of this brew. So I take the original gravity of 1.056. I deduct the final gravity of 1.020, which gives me 0.036, and then I multiply this by 131.25, and that gives me a final ABV of 4.7%. Not exactly rocket fuel, slightly disappointingly low, but hey, You win some, you lose some. Okay, my flip top bottle was nice and easy to close. That's done. Everything else has got to be crown capped. So I'm crown capping today with my Kegland crown capper, Pac-Man, whatever you want to call it, right? So it's a fairly straightforward process, which should be easier than what it is. It depends on the bottles. I'm going to just give you a piece of advice from something I've found out. If you've got a bottle like this that's got that nice shape just there, so you've got a definite sort of jutting out bit just here, and then you've got the neck, these tend to cap reasonably easily, right? Here's a different sort of neck. Now notice that this bit here is a lot higher and it's a lot shorter. If you look at the depth in comparison, the shorter ones are the ones which are a real pig to do. And anyone that watches my films will know how much I hate capping, and it's because of these bottles. That's the reason. So if I can give you any advice, if you're saving bottles, San Miguel ones, whilst they look nice, they're not great for doing it. Western cider bottles, brilliant. So I'll begin with an Erdinger bottle today. I've got it in the sink and standing on a silicone mat. Because it's in the sink, it's lower than worktop level, and I'm pressing downwards, which means that it's less likely to slip. The silicone mat also should mean it doesn't slip. Fingers crossed. So I've got my cap inside the capper. I'm going to lower that onto the bottle and then gently tease these arms downwards. I want it to bite, get a bit of purchase. Okay, after a fair amount of swearing, that's done. Didn't go as well as I was hoping it would. I'm just going to rinse my bottles off under the tap to get any sticky residue off before I label them. So I'm just labelling my bottles. I like to make them look nice. Plus it's good to know what's in them, obviously. And there they all are. Welcome to the conditioning room. So here are my beers down here on these shelves. These shelves are temperature controlled, and that just there is a thermometer connected to a thermostat plug just there, which is connected to a heater on the wall behind the shelves. When the temperature drops below 19.5, thermostat kicks in, heater comes on. Once it gets to 20.5, it all shuts off again. So it keeps it at the right temperature for conditioning. And conditioning is the process where the yeast, which is in suspension in the beer, will eat the sugar. It will create a tiny fermentation, which will create CO2 as a byproduct. And as a result of that, hopefully, fingers crossed, a sparkle. So I'm going to leave this to condition for a month and I'll be back to you then. So see you later, folks. Good evening from the kitchen, folks. It's my autumn Gorse Porter opening night. I've got absolutely no idea if this is going to have worked or not, but this is what I'm looking for. I'm going to open it in a second and I want to hear a tss. I'd like it to pour and look like a beer as I'm pouring it. I'd like it to have a head. I'd like it to smell nice, but above all, I'd like it to taste nice. But the head and the tasting nice are the makers or breakers for me. Let's see what happens. Am I going to get a tss? Oh, I did. And I've got vapour. There's activity. Oh my God. Wow. This cannot possibly be another beer success, surely. The amount of rubbish ones I've had. Oh, wow. All right, yeah, all right. Yeah. Come on, let's have all the good head jokes. Yeah, let's get that out of the way now. Come on, we're not 15 anymore. I wasn't quite expecting that level of activity. It certainly smells like a porter. I can't really taste it like that. I'll come back to you in a minute. Let me try re-pouring that one slowly. Well, it's got life in it, kids. My word, has it got life in it. This is a very slow pourer. This would be one of those beers that if it was in a corny keg, you'd be having a nightmare with it. Right. Yeah, I give good head. Right, okay, right. So, can we all agree that that looks like a very lively beer? Thank you. Possibly too lively, but you could see then I didn't chuck it in, so let's have a taste. I'm just trying to battle the froth to get the actual liquid. Wow. That is absolutely gorgeous. That does not taste like 4.7%. It tastes like 5.5 to 6%. I don't want to blow my own trumpet here, but it tastes like Kirkstall Black Band Porter. Yeah, it genuinely does taste like Kirkstall Black Band Porter. I mean, and that's a beer which I think is like God tier in terms of the porters round here. But that, just, if you'd given me this blind and said what you got, that's what I would have said. Forget the Gorse, it don't come through whatsoever. It's just a bloody good porter. I'm so happy about that. I really, honestly, I never know what I'm going to get when I'm doing the beers. I am a fudger. I know I mess around. I know I just like play it by ear and do what I do. But do you know what? The result is there and it's very, very nice. So folks, I'm more than happy with this. I've had a crappy day, so this is a really nice end to it. Cheers, and I'll catch you on the next brew. The film that you've just watched is a Moss Home and Garden production. You can find more by going to www.mosshomeandgarden.co.uk. I'd just like to say thank you very much for supporting my YouTube channel and for watching my films. It really is very much appreciated. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to my YouTube channel in order to receive future updates about the home and garden films which I upload. You can find my YouTube channel by going to www.mosshomeandgarden.co.uk. Please click on the red subscribe button. When you've done that, a little bell will appear. If you press that also, then you'll get future updates about the films which I upload. If you like my films, if you like my style of filming, then you might also like my travel channel, which you will find by going to youtube.com/Stuart Moss or type in www.mosstravel.tv. Again, if you could subscribe to that channel, it would be hugely appreciated. If you'd like to get Moss Home and Garden updates on Facebook, then please open Facebook and do a search for Moss Home and Garden, and you will find the page. If you like the page, then you will get future updates on there. And if you'd like to connect on Instagram for home, garden and travel photography, as well as some stories, then my username is StuMoss, STUMOSS. If you'd like to connect on Twitter, then my username is @StuartMoss. And if you'd like to contact me about film usage or any other issue, please just email me on stewmosshomegarden@gmail.com. Once again, thank you very much for supporting my channel, for watching my films. I do appreciate it. I'd just like you all to have a great day.